Chapter 21 of Lonesome Land by B.M. Bauer. Recording is in the public domain. Chapter 21 Val Decides. It was the middle of the next forenoon when Manley came riding home, sullen from drink and a losing game of poker, which had kept him all night at the table, and at sunrise sent him forth in the mood which meets a grievance more than halfway. He did not stop at the house, though he saw Val through the open door. He did not trouble to speak to her even, but rode on to the stable, stopping at the corral to look over the fence at the calves, still bawling sporadically between half-hearted nibblings at the hay which Polycarp had thrown into them. Just at first he did not notice anything wrong, but soon a vague disquiet seized him, and he frowned thoughtfully at the little group. Something puzzled him, but his brain, fogged with whisky and loss of sleep, and the reaction from hours of concentration upon the game, could not quite grasp the thing that troubled him. In a moment, however, he gave an inarticulate bellow, wheeled about, and rode back to the house. He threw himself from the horse almost before it stopped, and rushed into the kitchen. Val, ironing one of her ruffled white aprons, looked up quickly, turned rather pale, and then stiffened perceptibly for the conflict that was coming. "There's only 4 calves in the corral, and I brought in 5. Where's the other one?" He came up and stood quite close to her, so close that Val took a step backward. He did not speak loud, but there was something in his tone, in his look, that drove the little remaining color from her face. "Manley," she said, with a catch of the breath, "why did you do that horrible thing? What devil possessed you? I asked you, where is that other calf? Where is it? There's only 4. I brought in 5. His very calmness was terrifying. Val threw back her head, and her eyes were, as they frequently became in moments of stress, yellow, inscrutable, like the eyes of a lion in a cage. "Yes, you brought in 5. One of the 5, at least, you stole. You put your brand, Manley Fleetwood, on a calf that did not belong to you. It belonged to the Wishbone, and you know it. I have learned many disagreeable things about you, Manley, in the past 2 years. Yesterday morning I learned that you were a thief. Ah, I despise you. Stealing from the very men who helped you, the men to whom you owe nothing but gratitude and friendship. Have you no manhood whatever? Besides being weak and shiftless, are you a criminal as well? How can you be so utterly lacking in common decency even?" She eyed him as she would look at some strange monster in a museum, about which she was rather curious. "I asked you where that other calf is, and you'd better tell me." It was the tone which goes well with a knife thrust or a blow, but the contempt in Val's face did not change. "Well, you'll have to hunt for it if you want to. The cow, a Wishbone cow, mind you, came and claimed it. I let her have it. No stolen goods can remain on this ranch with my knowledge, Manley Fleetwood. Please remember—" "Oh, you turned it out, did you? You turned it out?" He had her by the throat, shaking her as a puppy shakes a purloined shoe. "I could kill you for that." "Manley, ah!" It was not pleasant, that gurgling cry, as she straggled to get free. He had the look of a maniac as he pressed his fingers into her throat and glared down into her purpling face. With a sudden impulse he cast her limp form violently from him. She struck against a chair, fell from that to the floor, and lay a huddled heap, her crisp, ruffled skirt just giving a glimpse of tiny, half-worn slippers, her yellow hair fallen loose and hiding her face. He stared down at her, but he felt no remorse. She had jeopardized his liberty, his standing among men. A cold horror caught him when he thought of the calf turned loose in the range, his brand on its ribs. He rushed in a panic from the kitchen, flung himself into the saddle, and went off across the coulee, whipping both sides of his horse. She had not told him, indeed he had not asked her, which way the cow had gone, but instinctively he rode to the west, the direction from which he had driven the calves. One thought possessed him utterly: he must find that calf. So he rode here and there, doubling and turning to search every feeding herd he glimpsed, fearing to face the possibility of failure and its inevitable consequence. The cat, with the white spots on its sides, Val called her Mary Arabella, for some whimsical reason, came into the kitchen, looked inquiringly at the huddled figure upon the floor, gave a faint mew, and went slowly up, purring and arching her back. She snuffed a moment at Val's hair, then settled herself in the hollow of Val's arm and curled down for a nap. The sun, sliding up to midday, shone straight in upon them through the open door. Polycarp Jenks, riding that way in obedience to some obscure impulse, lifted his hand to give his customary tap-tap before he walked in, saw Val lying there, and almost fell headlong into the room in his haste and perturbation. It looked very much as if he had at last stumbled upon the horrible tragedy which was his one day-dream. To be an eye-witness of a murder, and to be able to tell the tale afterward without minute horrifying detail, that, to Polycarp, would make life really worth living. He shuffled over to Val, pushed aside the mass of yellow hair, turned her head so that he could look into her face, saw at once the bruised marks upon her throat, and stood up very straight. "Foul play has been done here," he exclaimed melodramatically, eyeing the cat sternly. "Murder, that's what it is, by granny, a foul murder." The victim of the foul murder stirred slightly. Polycarp started and bent over her again, somewhat disconcerted, perhaps, but more humanly anxious. "Miss Fleetwood, Miss Fleetwood, you hurt? It's Polycarp Jenks talking to you." He hesitated, pushed the cat away, lifted Val with some difficulty, and carried her into the front room and deposited her on the couch. Then he hurried after some water. "Come might' nigh been a murder, by granny, from the marks on her neck. Come might' nigh, all right." He sprinkled water lavishly upon her face, bethought him of a possible whiskey flask in the haystack, and ran every step of the way, there and back. He found a discarded bottle with a very little left in it, and forced the liquor down her throat. "That'll fetch you if anything will, he mumbled, tittering from sheer excitement. Beyond a very natural desire to do what he could for her, he was extremely anxious to bring her to her senses, so that he could hear what had happened, and how it had happened. "Bet you Man got jealous of her'n Kenneth, by granny, I bet you that's how it come about. Eh? Feelin' better, Miss Fleetwood?" Val had opened her eyes and was looking at him rather stupidly. There was a bruise upon her head as well as upon her throat. She had been stunned, and her wits came back slowly. When she recognized Polycarp, she tried ineffectually to sit up. Is he gone?" Her voice was husky, her speech labored. "Man, you mean? He's gone, yes. Don't you be afeard, not whilst I'm here, by granny. How came it he done this to you?" Val was still staring at him bewilderedly. Polycarp repeated his question 3 times before the blank look left her eyes. "I turned the calf out the cow came and claimed it. Manley." She lifted her hand as if it were very, very heavy, and fumbled at her throat. Manley, when I told him he was a thief—" She dropped her hand wearily to her side and closed her eyes, as if the sight of Polycarp's face, so close to hers and so insatiably curious and eager and cunning, was more than she could bear. "Go away," she commanded, after a minute or two. "I'm all right. It's nothing. I fell. It was the heat. Thank you so much." She opened her eyes and saw him there still. She looked at him gravely, speculatively. She waved her hand toward the bedroom. "Get me my hand glass in there on the dresser," she said. When he had tiptoed in and got it for her, she lifted it up slowly, with both hands, until she could see her throat. There were distinct, telltale marks upon the tender flesh, unmistakable fingerprints. She shivered and dropped the glass to the floor. But she stared steadily up at Polycarp, and after a moment she spoke with a certain fierceness. "Polycarp Jenks, don't ever tell about those marks. I don't want anyone to know. When, after a while, I want to think first, perhaps you can help me. Go away now. Not away from the ranch, but let me think. I'm all right, or I will be. Please go." Polycarp recognized that tone, however it might be hoarsened by bruised muscles and the shock of what she had suffered. He recognized also that look in her eyes. He had always obeyed that look and that tone. He obeyed them now, though with visible reluctance. He sat down in the kitchen to wait, and while he waited he chewed tobacco incessantly, and ruminated upon the mystery which lay behind the few words Val had first spoken, before she realized just what it was she was saying. After a long, long while, so long that even Polycarp's patience was feeling the strain, Val opened the door and stood leaning weakly against the casing. Her throat was swathed in a piece of white silk. "I wish, Polycarp, you'd get the team and hitch it to the light rig," she said. "I want to go to town, and I don't feel able to drive. Can you take me in? Can you spare the time?" "Why, certainly, I can take you in, Miss Fleetwood. I was just thinking it wasn't safe for you out here—" "It is perfectly safe," Val interrupted chillingly. "I am going because I want to see Arline Hawley." She raised her hand to the bandage. "I have a sore throat," she stated, staring hard at him. Then, with one of her impulsive changes, she smiled wistfully. "You'll be my friend, Polycarp, won't you?" she pleaded. "I can trust you, I know, with my secret. It is a secret. It must be a secret. I'll tell you the truth, Polycarp. It was Manley. He had been drinking again. We had a quarrel about something. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't mean to hurt me. But I fell. I struck my head. See, there is a great lump there." She pushed back her hair to show him the place. "So it's a secret, just between you and me, Polycarp Jenks." "Why, certainly, Miss Fleetwood. Don't you be the least mite uneasy. I'm your friend. I always have been. A feller ain't to be held responsible when he's drinkin', by granny, that's a fact. He ain't." "No," Val agreed laconically. "I suppose not. Let us go, then, as soon as we can, please. I'll stay overnight with Mrs. Hawley, and you can bring me back to-morrow, can't you? And you'll remember not to mention anything, won't you, Polycarp?" Polycarp stood very straight and dignified. "I hope, Miss Fleetwood, you can always depend on Polycarp Jenks," he replied virtuously. "Your secret is safe with me." Val smiled, somewhat doubtfully, it is true, and let him go. "Maybe it is. I hope so. she sighed as she turned away to dress for the trip. All through that long ride to town, Polycarp talked and talked and talked. He made surmises and waited openly to hear them confirmed or denied. He gave her advice. He told her everything he had ever heard about Manley, or had seen or knew from some other source. Everything, that is, save what was good. The sums he had lost at poker, or had borrowed, the debts he owed to the merchants, the reputation he had for talking big and doing little, the trouble he had had with this man and that man, and what he did not know for a certainty he guessed at, and so kept the subject alive. True, Val did not speak at all, except when he asked her how she felt. Then she would reply dully, "Pretty well, thank you, Polycarp." Invariably those were the words she used. Whenever he stole a furtive sidelong glance at her, she was staring straight ahead at the great, undulating prairie with the brown ribbon, which was the trail, thrown carelessly across to the skyline. Polycarp suspected that she did not see anything. She just stared with her eyes, while her thoughts were somewhere else. He was not even sure that she heard what he was saying. He thought she must be pretty sick, she was so pale, and she had such wide purple rings under her eyes. Also, he rather resented her desire to keep her trouble a secret. He favored telling everybody, and organizing a party to go out and run Man Fleetwood out of the country, as the very mildest rebuke which the outraged community could give and remain self-respecting. He even fell silent during the last 3 or 4 miles, while he dwelt longingly upon the keen pleasure there would be in leading such an expedition. "You'll remember, Polycarp, not to speak of this?" Val urged abruptly, when he drew up before the Hawley Hotel. "Not a hint, you know, until I give you permission. You promised." "Oh, certainly, Miss Fleetwood, certainly. Don't you be a mite uneasy." But the tone of Polycarp was dejected in the extreme. "And please be ready to drive me back in the morning. I should like to be at the ranch by noon at the latest." With that she left him and went into the hotel. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Lonesome Land by B.M. Bauer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22. A Friend in Need. "And so," Val finished, rather apathetically, pushing back the fallen lock of hair, "it has come to that. I can't remain here and keep any shred of self-respect. All my life I've been taught to believe divorce a terrible thing, a crime almost. Now I think it is sometimes a crime not to be divorced. For months I have been coming slowly to a decision, so this is really not as sudden as it may seem to you. It is humiliating to be compelled to borrow money, but I would much rather ask you than any of my own people. My pride is going to suffer enough when I meet them, as it is. I can't let them know just how miserable and sordid a failure—" Arline gave an inarticulate snort, bent her scrawny body nearly double, and reached frankly into her stocking. She fumbled there a moment and straightened triumphantly, grasping a flat buckskin bag. "I'd feel like shaking you if you went to anybody else but me," she declared, untying the bag. "I know what men is. Lord knows I seen enough of 'em and their meanness, and if I can help a woman out of the clutches of one, I'm tickled to death to get the chanct. I ain't saying they're all of 'em bad. I can afford to give the devil his due and still say that men is the limit. The good ones is so darn scarce, it ain't one woman in 50 lucky enough to get one. All I blame you for is staying with 'em as long as you have. I'd have quit long ago. I was beginning to think you never would come to your senses. But you had to fight that thing out for yourself. Every woman has to." I'm glad you've woke up to the fact that man Fleetwood didn't get a deed to you, body and soul, when he married you. You've been acting as if you thought he had. And I'm glad you've got sense enough to pull out of the game when you know the best you can expect is the worst of it. There ain't no hope for man Fleetwood. I seen that when he went back to drinking again after you was burnt out. I did think that would steady him down, but he ain't the kind that braces up when trouble hits him. He's the sort that stays down rather than go to the trouble of getting up. He's hopeless now as a rotten egg, and has been for the last year. Here, you take the whole works, and if you need more, I can get it for you by sending in to the bank." "Oh, but this is too much," Val protested when she had counted the money. "You're so good. But really and truly, I won't need half." Arline pushed away the proffered money impatiently. "How in time are you going to tell how much you'll need? Let me tell you, Val Payson, I ain't going to call you by his name no more, the dirty cur. I've been packing that money in my stocking for 6 months, just so's to have it handy when you wanted it. Divorces cost more'n marriage licenses, as you'll find out when you get started. And—" "You! Why, the idea!" Val pursed her lips with something like her old spirit. "How could you know I'd need to borrow money? I didn't know it myself, even. "Well, I can see through a wall when there's a knothole in it," paraphrased Arline calmly. "You may not know it, but you've been getting your back east notions knocked out of you pretty fast the last year or so. It was all a question of what kind of stuff you was made of underneath. You can put a polish on most anything, so I couldn't tell, right at first, what there was to you. But you're all right. I've seen that a long time back, and so I know dern well you'd be wanting money to pull loose with. It takes money, though I know it ain't polite to say much about real dollars and cents. You'll likely use every cent of that before you're through with the deal. And remember, there's a lot more growing in the same bush if you need it. It's only waiting to be picked." Val stared, found her eyes blurring so that she could not see, and with a sudden impulsive movement leaned over and put her arms around Arline, unkempt, scrawny, and wholly unlovely though she was. "Arline, you're an angel of goodness," she cried brokenly. "You're the best friend I ever had in my life. I've had many who petted me and flattered me, but you do things. I'm ashamed, because I haven't loved you every minute since I first saw you. I judged you, oh, you're pure, shining gold inside, instead of—" "Oh, get out!" Arline was compelled to gulp twice before she could say even that much. "I don't shine nowhere, inside or out. I know that well enough. I never had no chance to shine. It's always been wore off with hard knocks. But I like shiny folks all right, when they're fine clear through, and—" "Arline, dear, I do love you. I always shall. Arline loosened her clasp and jumped up precipitately. "Get out!" she repeated bashfully. "If you get me to cryin', Val Payson, I'll wish you was in Halifax. You go to bed and go to sleep, or I'll—" She almost ran from the room. Outside she stopped in a darkened corner of the hallway and stood for some minutes with her checked gingham apron pressed tightly over her face, and several times she sniffed audibly. When she finally returned to the kitchen her nose was pink, her eyelids were pink, and she was extremely petulant when she caught Minnie eyeing her curiously. Val had refused to eat any supper, and beyond telling Arline that she had decided to leave Manley and return to her mother in Fern Hill, she had not explained anything very clearly, her colorless face, for instance, nor her tightly swathed throat, nor the very noticeable bruise upon her temple. Arline had not asked a single question. Now, however, she spent some time fixing a tray with the daintiest food she knew and could procure, and took it upstairs with a certain diffidence in her manner and a rare tenderness in her faded, worldly-wide eyes. "You got to eat, you know," she reminded Val gently. "You're bucking up against the hardest part of the trail, and grub's a necessity. Take it like you would medicine, unless your throat's too sore. I see you got it all tied up." Val raised her hands in a swift alarm and clasped her throat as if she feared Arline would remove the bandages. "Oh, it's not sore. That is, it is sore. I mean not very much," she stammered betrayingly. Arline set down the tray upon the dresser and faced Val grimly. "I never asked you any questions, did I?" she demanded. "But you act for all the world as if do you want me to give a guess about that tied-up neck and that black and blue lump on your forehead? I never asked any questions. I didn't need to. Man Fleetwood's been maulin' you abound. I was kind of afraid he'd get to that point some day when he got mad enough. He's just the brand to beat up a woman. But if it took a beatin' to bring you to the quittin' point, I'm glad he done it. Only," she added darkly, "he better keep out of my reach. I'm just in the humor to claw him up some if I should git close enough. And if I happened to forget I'm a lady, I'd sure bawl him out, and the bigger crowd heard me, the better. Now you eat this, and don't get the idea you can cover up any meanness of Man Fleetwood's. Not from me, anyhow. I know men better'n you do. You couldn't tell me nothin' about him that would surprise me the least bit. I'm only thankful he didn't murder you in cold blood. Are you going to eat?" "Not if you keep on reminding me of such horrid things," wailed Val, and sobbed into her pillow. "It's bad enough to have him choke me without having you talk about it all the time." "Now, honey, don't you waste no tears on a brute like him. He ain't worth it." Arline was on her bony knees beside the bed, crying with sympathy and self-reproach. So, in truly feminine fashion, the two wept their way back to the solid ground of everyday living. Before they reached that desirable state of composure, however, Val told her everything, within certain limits set not by caution, but rather by her woman's instinct. She did not, for instance, say much about Kent, though she regretted openly that Polycarp knew so much about it. "Hope never needed no newspaper so long as Polycarp lives here," Arline grumbled, when Val was sitting up again and trying to eat Arline's toast and jelly made of buffalo berries, and sipping the tea which had gone cold. "But if I can round him up in time, I'll try and git him to keep his mouth shut. I'll scare the liver out of him some way. But if he caught on to that calf deal " She shook her head doubtfully. "The worst of it is, Fred's in town, and he's always pumping Polycarp dry, just to find out all that's going on. You go to bed, and I'll see if I can find out whether they're together. If they are but you needn't to worry none. I reckon I'm a match for the both of 'em. Why, I'd dope their coffee and send 'em both to sleep till Man got out of the country if I had to." She stood with her hands upon her angular hips and glared at Val. "I sure would do that very thing for you," she reiterated solemnly. "I don't pretend I'd do it for Man, but I would for you. But it's likely Kent has fixed things up so they can't git nothin' on Man if they try. He would if he said he would. That there's one feller that's on the square. You go to bed now, whilst I go on a still hunt of my own. I'll come and tell you if there's anything to tell." It was easy enough to make the promise, but keeping it was so difficult that she yielded to the temptation of going to bed and letting Val sleep in peace, which she could not have done if she had known that Polycarp Jenks and Fred De Garmo left town on horseback within an hour after Polycarp had entered it, and that they had told no man their errand. Over behind Brinberg's store, Polycarp had told Fred all he knew, all he suspected, and all he believed would come to pass. Strictly on the quiet, of course, he reminded Fred of that over and over, because he had promised Mrs. Fleetwood that he would not mention it. "But by granny," he apologized, "I didn't like the idea of keeping a thing like that from you. It would kinda look as if I was standing in on the deal, which I ain't. Nobody can't accuse me of rustlin', no matter what else I might do. You know that, Fred." "Sure, I know you're honest, anyway," Fred responded quite sincerely. "Well, I considered it my duty to tell you. I've kinda had my suspicions all fall that there was somethin' scaly goin' on at Cold Spring. Looked to me like Man had too blamed many calves missing by spring round up for the size of his herd. I don't know, of course, just where he gets 'em. You'll have to find that out. But he's brung 12 or 14 to the ranch, 2 or 3 at a time. And what she said when she first come to told me right out, by granny, that Man choked her because she called him a thief, and somethin' about a cow comin' and claimin' her calf, and her turnin' it out. That ought to be might' nigh all the evidence you need, Fred, if you find it. She don't know she said it, but she wouldn't have told it, by granny, if it wasn't so, now would she?" "And you say all this happened today?" Fred pondered for a minute. "That's queer, because I almost caught a fellow last night doing some funny work on a calf. A wishbone cow it was, and her calf fresh burned. A barred out brand, by thunder. If it was today, I'd say Man found it and blotched the brand. I wish now I'd hazed them over to the Double Diamond and corralled 'em, like I had a mind to. But we can find 'em easy enough. But that was last night, and you say this big setting came off today? You sure, Polly?" "Course I'm sure." Polycarp waggled his head solemnly. He was enjoying himself to the limit. He was the man on the inside, giving out information of the greatest importance, and an officer of the law was hanging anxiously upon his words. He spoke slowly, giving weight to every word. "I rode up to the house, Man's house, somewhere close to noon, and there she was, layin' on the kitchen floor. Didn't know nothin', and had the marks of somebody's fingers on her throat. The rest of her neck so white they showed up, by granny, like Polycarp never could think of a simile. He always expectorated in such an emergency, and left his sentence unfinished. He did so now, and Fred cut in unfeelingly. "Never mind that. You've gone over it half a dozen times. You say it was today, at noon or thereabouts. Man must have done it when he found out she'd turned the calf loose. He wouldn't unless he was pretty mad, and scared. He isn't cold-blooded enough to wait till he'd barred out the brand, and then go home and choke his wife. He didn't know about the calf till today, that's a cinch." He studied the matter with an air of grave importance. "Polycarp," he said abruptly, "I'm going to need you. We've got to find that bunch of cattle. It ought to be easy enough, and haze 'em down into Man's field where his bunch of calves are, see? Any calf that's been weaned in the last 3 weeks will be pretty likely to claim its mother, and if he's got any calves branded that claim cows with some other brand, well," he threw out his hands in a comprehensive gesture. "That's the quickest way I know to get 'em," he said. "I want a witness along, and some help. And you," he eyed Polycarp keenly, "ain't safe running around town loose. All your brains seem to leak out your mouth. So you come along with me." "Well, any time after tomorrer," hedged Polycarp, offended by the implication that he talked too much. "I've got to drive the team home for Miss Fleetwood tomorrer. I told her I would." "Well, you won't. You're going to hit the trail with me just as soon as I can find a horse for you to ride. We'll sleep at the Double Diamond and start from there in the morning. And if I catch you letting a word out of you about this deal, I'll just have to arrest you for—" He did not quite know what, but the very vagueness of the threat had its effect upon Polycarp. He went without further argument, though first he went to the Hawley Hotel, with Fred close behind him as a precaution against imprudent gossip, and left word in the office that he would not be able to drive Mrs. Fleetwood home the next morning, but would be back to take her out the day after that, if she did not mind staying in town. It was that message which Arline deliberately held back from Val until morning. "You better stay here," she advised then. "Polycarp and Fred's up to some devilment, that's a cinch. But whatever it is, you're better off right here with me. Supposin' you should drive out there and run into Man, what then?" Val shivered. That's the only thing I can't bear," she admitted, as if the time for proud dignity and reserve had gone by. "If I could be sure I wouldn't need to meet him, I'd rather go alone. Really and truly I would. You know the horses are perfectly safe. I've driven them to town 50 times if I have once. I had to, out there alone so much of the time. I'd rather not have Polycarp spying around. I've got to pack up. There are so many things of no value to him, things I brought out here with me. And there are all my manuscripts. I can't leave them lying around, even if they aren't worth anything, especially since they aren't worth anything." She pushed back her chair with a weary movement. "If I could only be sure, if I knew where he is," she sighed. "I'll lend you my gun," Arline offered in good faith. "If he comes around you and starts any funny business again, you can stand him off, even if you got some delicate feelin's about blowin' his brains out." "Oh, I couldn't. I'm deadly afraid of guns." Val shuddered. "Well, then you can't go alone. I'd go with you if you could get packed up so as to come back today. I guess Min could make out to get 2 meals alone." "Oh, no. Really and truly, Arline, I'd just as soon go alone. I would rather, dear." Arline was not accustomed to being called dear. She surrendered with some confusion and a blush. "Well, you better wait," she admonished, temporizingly. "Something may turn up." Presently something did turn up. She rushed breathlessly into Val's room and caught her by the arm. "Now's your chance, Val," she hissed in a loud whisper. "Man just now rode into town. He's over in Pop's place. I seen him go in. He's good for the day, sure. I'll have Hank hitch right up, and you can go down to the stable and start from there, so's he won't see you. And I'll keep an eye out. And if he leaves town I won't be far behind, let me tell you. He won't, though. There ain't one chance in 100 he'll leave that saloon till he's full, and if he tries to go then, I'll have somebody lock him up in the ice house till you get back. You want to hurry up that packing and get in here quick as you can." She went to the stable with Val, her apron thrown over her head for want of a hat. When Val was setting herself in the seat, Arline caught at the wheel. "Say, how in time you going to get your trunks loaded into the wagon?" she cried. "You can't do it alone." Val pursed her lips. She had not thought of that. "But Polycarp will come by the time I am ready," she decided. "You couldn't keep him away, Arline. He would be afraid he might miss something, because I suppose ours is the only ranch in the country where the wheels aren't turning smoothly. Polycarp and I can manage." Hank, grinning under his ragged brown mustache, handed her the lines. "I've got my orders," he told her briefly. I'll watch out the trail's kept clear." "Oh, thank you. I've so many good friends," Val answered, giving him a smile to stir his sluggish blood. "Good bye, Arline. Don't worry about me. There's a dear. I shall not be back before to-morrow night, probably." Both Arline and Hank stood where they were and watched her out of sight before they turned back to the sordid tasks which made up their lives. "She'll make it. She's the proper stuff," Hank remarked, and lighted his pipe. Arline, for a wonder, sighed and said nothing. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Lonesome Land by B.M. Bauer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 23. Caught. After 2 nights and a day of torment unbearable, Kent bolted from his work, which would have taken him that day, as it had done the day before, in a direction opposite to that which his mind and his heart followed, and without apology or explanation to his foreman, rode straight to Cold Spring Coulee. He had no very definite plan, except to see Val. He did not even know what he would say when he faced her. Michael was steaming from nose to tail when he stopped at the yard gate, which shows how impatience had driven his master. Kent glanced quickly around the place as he walked up the narrow path to the house. Nothing was changed in the slightest particular as far as he could see, and he realized then that he had been uneasy as well as anxious. Both doors were closed, so that he was obliged to knock before Val became visible. He had a fleeting impression of extreme caution in the way she opened the door and looked out, but he forgot it immediately in his joy at seeing her. "Oh, it's you. Come in, and you won't mind if I close the door. I'm afraid I'm the victim of nerves today." "Why?" Kent was instantly solicitous. "Has anything happened since I was here?" Val shook her head, smiling faintly. "Nothing that need to worry you, pal. I don't want to talk about worries. I want to be cheered up. I haven't laughed, Kent, for so long that I'm afraid my facial muscles are getting stiff. Say something funny, can't you?" Kent pushed his hat far back on his head and sat down upon a corner of the table. "Such is life in the far West, and the farther west you go, the livelier," he began to declaim dutifully. "The livelier it gets. Yes, I've heard that 1,000,000 times, I believe. I can't laugh at that. I never did think it funny." She sighed and twitched her shoulders impatiently because of it. "I see you brought back the glasses," she remarked inanely. "You certainly weren't in any great hurry, were you?" "Oh, they had us riding over east of the home ranch, hazing in some out of the hills. I'm supposed to be over there right now, but I ain't. I expect I'll get the can all right." "If you're going away, what do you care?" she taunted. Sure, what do I care?" He eyed her from under his brows while he bent to light a match upon the sole of his boot. Val had long ago settled his compunctions about smoking in her presence. "You seem to be all tore up here," he observed irrelevantly. "Cleaning house?" "Yes, cleaning house." Val smiled ambiguously. "Hubby in town?" "Yes, he went in yesterday and hasn't come back yet." Kent smoked for a moment meditatively. "I found that calf all right," he informed her at last. "It was too late to ride around this way and tell you that night. So you needn't worry any more about that." "I'm not worrying about that." Val stooped and picked up a hairpin from the floor and twirled it absently in her fingers. "I don't think it matters any more. Yesterday afternoon Fred De Garmo and Polycarp Jenks came into the coulee with a bunch of cattle, and turned all the calves out of the river field with them, and after a while they drove the whole lot of them away somewhere, over that way." She waved a slim hand to the west. "They let out the calves in the corral, too. I saw them from the window, but I didn't ask them any questions. I really didn't need to, did I?" She grazed him with a glance. "I thought perhaps you would fail to find that calf. I'm glad you did, though. So it wasn't that started them hunting around here, Polycarp and Fred, I mean." Kent looked at her queerly. Her voice was without any emotion whatever, as if the subject held no personal interest for her. He finished his cigarette and threw the stub out into the yard before either of them spoke another word. He closed the door again, stood there for a minute making up his mind, and went slowly over to where she was sitting listlessly in a chair, her hands folded loosely in her lap. He gripped with one hand the chair back and stared down at her high-piled yellow hair. "How long do you think I'm going to stand around and let you be dragged into trouble like this?" he began abruptly. "You know what I told you the other day. I could say the same thing over again, and a lot more, and I'd mean more than I could find words for. Maybe you can stand this sort of thing. I can't. I'm not going to try. If you're bound to stick to that gentleman, I'm going to get out of the country where I can't see you killed by inches. Every time I come, you're a little bit whiter and a little bigger eyed. I can't stand it, I tell you. You weren't made for a hell like you're living. You were meant to be happy, and I was meant to make you happy. Every morning when I open my eyes, do you know what I think? I think it's another day we ought to be happy in, you and me." He took her suddenly by the shoulder and brought her up facing him, where he could look into her eyes. "We've only got just one life to live, Val," he pleaded, "and we could be happy together. I'd stake my life on that. I can't go on forever just being friends, and eating my heart out for you and seeing you abused. And what for? Just because a preacher mumbled some words over you two? Only for that you wouldn't stay with him overnight, and you know it. Is that what ought to tie two human beings together, without love or even friendship? You hate him. You can't look me in the eyes and say you don't. And he's tired of you. Some other woman would please him better. And I could make you happy." Val broke away from his grasp and retreated until the table was between them. Her listlessness was a thing forgotten. She was panting with the quick beating of her heart. "Kent, don't, pal. You mustn't say those things. It's wicked." "It's true," he cried hotly. "Can you look at me and say it ain't the truth?" "You've spoiled our friendship, Kent," she accused, while she evaded his question. "It meant so much to me, just your dear, good friendship." "My love could mean a whole lot more," he declared sturdily. "But you mustn't say those things. You mustn't feel that way, Kent." "Oh?" he laughed grimly. "Mustn't I? How are you going to stop me?" He stared hard at her, his face growing slowly rigid. "There's just one way to stop me from saying such wicked things," he told her. "You can tell me you don't care anything about me, and never could, not even if that down east conscience of yours didn't butt into the game. You can tell me that and swear it's the truth, and I'll leave the country. I'll go so far you'll never see me again, so I'll never bother you any more. I can't promise I'll stop loving you, but for my own sake I'll sure try hard enough." He set his teeth hard together and stood quiet, watching her. Val tried to answer him. Evidently she could not manage her voice, for he saw her begin softly beating her lips with her fist, fighting to get back her self-control. Once or twice he had seen her do that, when, womanlike, the tears would come in spite of her. "I don't want you to go away," she articulated at last with a hint of stubbornness. "Well, what do you want? I can't stay unless—" He did not attempt to finish the sentence. He knew there was no need. She understood well enough the alternative. For long minutes she did not speak, because she could not. Like many women, she fought desperately against the tears which seemed a badge of her femininity. She sat down in a chair, dropped her face upon her folded arms, and bit her lips until they were sore. Kent took a step toward her, reconsidered, and went over to the window, where he stood staring moodily out until she began speaking. Even then he did not turn immediately toward her. "You needn't go, Kent," she said with some semblance of calm, "because I'm going. I didn't tell you, but I'm going home. I'm going to get free, by the same law that tied me to him. You are right. I have a down east conscience. I think I was born with it. It demands that I get my freedom honestly. I can't steal it, pal. I couldn't be happy if I did that, no matter how hard I might try, or you." He turned eagerly toward her then, but she stopped him with a gesture. "No, stay where you are. I want to solve my problem and leave you out of it. You're a complication, pal, when you talk like you've just been talking. It makes my conscience wonder whether I'm honest with myself. I've got to leave you out, don't you see? And so, leaving you out, I don't feel that any woman should be expected to go on like I'm doing. You don't know, I couldn't tell you just how impossible this marriage of mine has become. The day after, well, yesterday, no, the day before yesterday, he came home and found out what I'd done. I couldn't stay here after that, so—" "What did he do?" Kent demanded sharply. "He didn't dare to lay his hands on you, did he? By—" "Don't swear, Kent. I hear so much of that from him." Val smiled curiously. He swore at me. I couldn't stay with him after that, could I, dear?" Whether she really meant to speak that last word or not, it set Kent's blood dancing so that he forgot to urge his question farther. He took 2 eager steps toward her, and she retreated again behind the table. "Kent, don't! How can I tell you anything if you won't be good?" She waited until he was standing rather sulkily by the window again. "Anyway, it doesn't matter now what he has done. I am going to leave him. I'm going to get a divorce. Not even the strictest down east conscience could demand that I stay. I'm perfectly at ease upon that point. About this last trouble, with the calves, if I could help him I would, of course, but all I could say would only make matters worse, and I'm a wretched failure at lying. I can help him more, I think, by going away. I feel certain there's going to be trouble over those calves. Fred De Garmo never would have come down here and driven them all away, would he, unless there was going to be trouble?" "If he came in here and got the calves, it looks as if he meant business, all right." Kent frowned absently at the white window curtain. "I've seen the time," he added reflectively, "when I'd be all broke up to have Man get into trouble. We used to be pretty good friends." "A year ago it would have broken my heart," Val sighed. "We do change so. I can't quite understand why I should feel so indifferent about it now. Even the other day it was terrible. But when I felt his fingers—" She stopped, guiltily. "He seems a stranger to me now. I don't even hate him so very much. I don't want to meet him, though." "Neither do I." But there was a different meaning in Kent's tone. "So you're going to quit?" He looked at her thoughtfully. You'll leave your address, I hope."
"Oh, yes."
Val's voice betrayed some inward trepidation.
"I'm not running away. I'm just going."
"I see." He sighed, impatient at the restraint she had put upon him.
"That don't mean you won't ever come back, does it? Or that the trains are going to quit carrying passengers to your town? Because you can't always keep me out of your problem, let me tell you."
"Is it against the rules to ask when you're going, and how?"
"Just as soon as I can get my trunks packed, and Polycarp, or somebody, comes to help me load them into the spring wagon. I promised Arline Hawley I would be in town tonight. I don't know, though. I don't seem to be making much progress with my packing." She smiled at him more brightly. "Let's wade ashore, pal, and get to work instead of talking about things better left alone. I know just exactly what you're thinking, and I'm going to let you help me instead of Polycarp. I'm frightfully angry with him, anyway. He promised me, on his word of honor, that he wouldn't mention a thing, and he must have actually hunted for a chance to tell. He didn't have the nerve to come to the house yesterday, when he was here with Fred. Perhaps he won't come today, after all. So you'll have to help me make my getaway, pal." Kent wavered. "You're the limit, all right," he told her after a period of hesitation. "You just wait, old girl, till you get that conscience of yours squared. What shall I do? I can pack a war bag in 1 minute and 3/4, and a horse in 5 minutes, provided he don't get gay and pitch the pack off a time or two, and somebody's around to help throw the hitch. Just tell me where to start in, and you won't be able to see me for dust." "You seem in a frightful hurry to have me go," Val complained, laughing, nevertheless, with a nervous reaction. "Packing a trunk takes time, and care, and intelligence." "Now isn't that awful?" Kent's eyes flared with mirth, all the more pronounced because it was entirely superficial. "Well, you take the time and care, Mrs. Goodpacker, and I'll cheerfully furnish the intelligence. This goes, I reckon?" He squeezed a pink cushion into as small a space as possible, and held it out at arm's length. "That goes to Arline. Don't put it in there." Val's laughter was not far from hysteria. Kent was pretending to stuff the pink cushion into her handbag. "Better take it. You'll " The front door was pushed violently open, and Manley almost fell into the room. Val gave a little inarticulate cry and shrank back against the wall before she could recover herself. They had for the moment forgotten Manley, and all he stood for in the way of heartbreak. A strange-looking Manley he was, with his white face and staring, bloodshot eyes, and the cruel animal lines around his mouth. Hardly recognizable to one who had not seen him since 3 or 4 years before, he would have been. He stopped short just over the threshold, and glanced suspiciously from one to the other before he came farther into the room. "Dig up some grub, Val, in a bag, so I can carry it on horseback," he commanded. "And a blanket. Where did you put those rifle cartridges?" He hurried across the room to where his rifle and belt hung upon the wall, just over the little home-made bookcase. "I had a couple of boxes. Where are they?" He snatched down the rifle, took the belt, and began buckling it around him with fumbling fingers. Mechanically Val reached upon a higher shelf and got him the 2 boxes of shells. Her eyes were fixed curiously upon his face. "What has happened?" she asked him as he tore open a box and began pushing the shells one by one into his belt. "Fred De Garmo. He tried to arrest me in town. I shot him dead." He glanced furtively at Kent. "Can I take your horse, Kent? I want to get across the river before
You shot Fred?" Val was staring at him stupidly. He whirled savagely toward her. "Yes, and I'd shoot any man that walked up and tried to take me. He was a fool if he thought all he had to do was crook his finger and say, 'Come along.' It was over those calves, and I'd say you had a hand in it if I hadn't found that calf, and saw how you burned out the brand before you turned it loose. You might have told me. I wouldn't have—" He shifted his gaze toward Kent. "The hell of it is, the sheriff happened to be in town for something. He's back a couple of miles. For God's sake, move! And get that flour and bacon and some matches. I've got to get across the river. I can shake 'em off on the other side. Hurry, Val!" She went out into the kitchen, and they heard her moving about, collecting the things he needed. "I'll have to take your horse, Kent." Manley turned to him with a certain wheedling tone, infinitely disgusting to the other. "Mine's all in. I rode him down getting this far. I've got to get across the river, and into the hills the other side. I can dodge 'em over there. You can have my horse. He's good as yours, anyway." He seemed to feel a slight discomfort at Kent's silence. "You've always stood by me. Anyway, it wasn't so much my fault. He came at me unawares, and says, 'Man Fleetwood, you're my prisoner.' Why, the very tone of him was an insult, and I won't stand for being arrested. I pulled my gun and got him through the lungs. Heard him yelling he was dead. Hurry up with that grub. I can't wait here till—" "I ought to tell you Michael's no good for water," Kent forced himself to say. "He's liable to turn back on you. He's scared of it." "He won't turn back with me. Not with old Jake Bondy at my heels." Manley snatched the bag of provisions from Val when she appeared, and started for the door. "You better leave off some of that hardware, then," Kent advised perfunctorily. "You're liable to have to swim." "I don't care how I get across, just so—" A panic seemed to seize him then. Without a word of thanks or farewell he rushed out, threw himself into Kent's saddle without taking time to tie on his bundle of bacon and flour, or remembering the blanket he had asked for. Holding his provisions under his arm, his rifle in one hand, and his range clutched in the other, he struck the spurs home and raced down the coulee toward the river. Fred and Polycarp had not troubled to put up the wire gate after emptying the river field, so he had a straight run of it to the very river bank. The two stood together at the window and watched him go. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Lonesome Land by B.M. Bauer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 24. Retribution. "He thought it was I burned out that brand. Did you notice what he said?" Val, as frequently happens in times of stress, spoke first of a trivial matter, before her mind would grasp the greater issues. "He'll never make it," said Kent, speaking involuntarily his thought. "There comes old Jake Bondy now, down the hill. Still, I don't know, if Michael takes to the water all right." "If the sheriff comes here, what shall we tell him? Shall we—" "He won't. He's turning off, don't you see? He must have got a sight of Man from the top of the hill. Michael's tolerably fresh, and Jake's horse isn't. That makes a big difference." Val weakened unexpectedly, as the full meaning of it all swept through her mind. "Oh, it's horrible!" she whispered. "Kent, what can we do?" "Not a thing. Only keep our heads, and don't give way to nerves," he hinted. "It's something out of our reach. Let's not go all to pieces over it, pal." She steadied under his calm voice. I'm always acting foolish just at the wrong time. But to think he could—" "Don't think. You'll have enough of that to do, managing your own affairs. All this doesn't change a thing for you. It makes you feel bad, and for that I could kill him almost." So much flashed out, and then he brought himself in hand again. "You've still got to pack your trunks and take the train home, just the same as if this hadn't happened. I didn't like the idea at first, but now I see it's the best thing you can do for the present. After a while we'll see about it. Don't look out if it upsets you, Val. You can't do any good, and you've got to save your nerves. Let's pull down the shade." "Oh, I've got to see." Perversely she caught up the field glasses from the table, drew them from their case, and letting down the upper window sash with a slam, focused the glasses upon the river. "He usually crosses right at the mouth of the coulee." She swung the glasses slowly about. "Oh, there he is, just on the bank. The river looks rather high. Oh, your horse doesn't want to go in, Kent. He whirls on his hind feet, and tried to bolt when Manley started in." Kent had been watching her face jealously. "Here, let me take a look, will you? I can tell." She yielded reluctantly, and in a moment he had caught the focus. "Tell me what you see, Kent, everything," she begged, looking anxiously from his face to the river. "Well, old Jake is fogging along down the coulee, but he ain't to the river yet, not by a long shot. Ah, Man's riding back to take a run in. That's the stuff. Got Michael's feet wet that time, the old freak. They came near going clean out of sight." "The sheriff, is he close enough?" Val began fearfully. "Oh, we're too far away to do a thing." Kent kept his eyes to the glasses. "We couldn't do a thing if we were right there. Man's in swimming water already. Jake ain't riding in, from the motions he's ordering Man back." "Oh, please let me look a minute. I won't get excited, Kent, and I'll tell you everything I see. Please!" Val's teeth were fairly chattering with excitement, so that Kent hesitated before he gave up the glasses. But it seemed boorish to refuse. She snatched at them as he took them from his eyes and placed them nervously to her own. "Oh, I see them both!" she cried after a second or two. "The sheriff's got his rifle in his hands. Kent, do you suppose he'd—" "Just a bluff, pal. They all do it. What—" Val gave a start. "Oh, he shot, Kent! I saw him take aim. It looked as if he pointed it straight at Manley, and the smoke—" She moved the glasses slowly, searching the river. "Well, he'd have to be a dandy to hit anything on the water, and with the sun in his eyes, too," Kent assured her, hardly taking his eyes from her face with its varying expression. Almost he could see what was taking place at the river, just by watching her. "Oh, there's Manley, away out! Why, your Michael is swimming beautifully, Kent. His head is high out of the water, and the water is churning like— Oh, Manley's holding his rifle up over his head. He's looking back toward shore. I wonder," she added softly, "what he's thinking about. Manley, you're my husband, and once I—" "Draw a bead on that gazabo on shore," Kent interrupted her faint fairing up of sentiment toward the man she had once loved and loved no more. Val drew a long breath and turned the glasses reluctantly from the fugitive. "I don't see him. Oh, yes! He's down beside a rock, on one knee, and he's taking a rest across the rock, and is squinting along. Oh, he can't hit him at that distance, can he, Kent? Would he dare? Why, it would be murder, wouldn't it? Oh, he shot again!" Kent reached up a hand and took the glasses from her eyes with a masterful gesture. "You let me look," he said laconically. "I'm steadier than you." Val crept closer to him and looked up into his face. She could read nothing there. His mouth was shut tight so that it was a stern, straight line, but that told her nothing. He always looked so when he was intent upon something, or thinking deeply. She turned her eyes toward the river, flowing smoothly across the mouth of the coulee. Between, the land lay sleeping lazily in the hazy sunlight of mid-autumn. The grass was brown, the rocky outcroppings of the coulee was yellow and gray and red, and the river was so blue and so quiet. Surely that sleepy coulee and that placid river could not be witnessing a tragedy. She turned her head, irritated by its very calmness. Her eyes dwelt wistfully upon Kent's half-concealed face. "What are they doing now, Kent?" Her tone was hushed. "I can't exactly," he mumbled absently, his mind a mile away. She waited a moment. "Can you see Manley?" This time he did not answer at all. He seemed terribly far off, as if only his shell of a body remained with her in the room. "Why don't you talk?" she wailed. She waited until she could endure no more, then reached up and snatched the glasses from his eyes. "I can't help it. I shall go crazy standing here. I've just got to see," she panted. For a moment he clung to the glasses and stared down at her. "You better not, sweetheart," he urged gently, but when she still held fast he let them go. She raised them hurriedly to her eyes, and turned to the river with a shrinking impatience to know the worst and have it over with. "Everything joggles so," she whimpered complainingly, trying vainly to steady the glasses. He slipped his arms around her and let her lean against him. She did not even seem to realize it. Just then she had caught sight of something, and her intense interest steadied her, so that she stood perfectly still. "Why, your horse!" she gasped. "Michael, he's got his feet straight up in the air. Oh, Kent, he's rolling over, sad over. I can't see." She held her breath. The glasses sagged as if they had grown all at once too heavy to hold. I thought I saw " She shivered and hid her face upon one upflung arm. Kent caught up the glasses and looked long at the river, unmindful of the girl sobbing wildly beside him. Finally he turned to her, hesitated, and then gathered her close in his arms. The glasses slid unheeded to the floor. "Don't cry. It's better this way, though it's hard enough, God knows." His voice was very gentle. "Think how awful it would have been, Val, if the law had got him. Don't cry like that. Such things are happening every day, somewhere." He realized suddenly that this was no way to comfort her, and stopped. He patted her shoulder with a sense of blank helplessness. He could make love, but this was not the time for love-making, and since he was denied that outlet for his feelings, he did not know what to do, except that he had led her to the couch and settled her among the cushions so that she would be physically comfortable, at least. He turned restlessly to the window, looked out, and then went to the couch and bent over her. "I'm going out to the gate. I want to see Jake Bondy. He's coming up the coulee," he said. "I won't be far. Poor little girl. Poor little pal. I wish I could help you." He touched his lips to her hair, so lightly she could not feel it, and left her. At the gate he met, not the sheriff, who was riding slowly, and had just passed through the field gate, but Arline and Hank, rattling up in the holly buckboard. "Thank the good Lord!" he exclaimed when he helped her from the rig. "I never was so glad to see anybody in my life. Go on in. She's in there crying her heart out. Man's dead. The sheriff shot him in the river. Oh, there's been hell to pay out here." "My heavens above!" Arline stared up at him while she grasped the significance of his words. "I knowed he'd hit for here. I followed right out as quick as Hank could hitch up the team. Did you hear about Fred?" Yes, I know all about it." Kent was guilty of pulling her through the gate, and then pushing her toward the house. "You go and do something for that poor girl. Pack her up and take her to town as quick as God'll let you. There's been misery enough for her out here to kill a dozen women." He watched until she had reached the porch, and then swung back to Hank, sitting calmly in the buckboard, with the lines gripped between his knees while he filled his pipe. "I can take care of the man's side of this business fast enough," Kent confessed whimsically. "But there's some things it takes a woman to handle." He glanced again over his shoulder, gave a huge sigh of relief when he glimpsed Arline's thin face as she passed the window, and knelt beside the couch, and turned with a lighter heart to meet the sheriff. End of Chapter 24. End of Lonesome Land by B. M. Bauer. Recording by Roger Moline.